You're listening to the Scaling Culture Podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. Our guest today is Serena Anthony, Chief People Officer at GroupM North America. Serena is an expert human resources management professional with over 20 years of experience working across complex ecosystems and demonstrating her true capabilities as an innovative thinker and change maker in the field. In her role at GroupM, Serena designs and implements programs and support for their workforce all across North America. Under her leadership, the people operation at GroupM challenges the conventional role of human resources to more holistically reflect an operation focused on the needs and well-being of its people and implementing new approaches and initiatives to tackle diversity, inclusion, and talent equity across the board. So in this episode of Scaling Culture, Ron and Serena discuss Serena's career in HR, her biggest learnings from CBC, having a front row seat when the company was going through the Jian Ghomeshi scandal, some creative strategies on how to effectively work with union and build trust and relationships, empathetic leadership and how to deal with mass layoffs, and how to ensure a company is aligned with your personal values and is likely to be a place you'd be proud to call home. This episode was sponsored by Empyrean, a top-tier HR technology company that empowers organizations to build a better culture by connecting employees to meaningful, life-enriching benefits. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today we have Serena Anthony, Chief People Officer, North America for GroupM. Serena, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ron, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And thanks for being a trooper. You're in LA right now, I think, right?
I am enjoying my last day of sunshine.
Well, yeah, I guess it's good. I mean, it's 6 a.m. there, so at least you're up early to get a full day, right?
That's correct. So
Excellent.
Thank you for that.
And I know you're just kind of starting to feel better, so thanks. I know you're a little under the weather, so I appreciate you you stepping up to join us today.
No, I was really looking forward to it. So there's no way I would miss. Thank you.
Oh, great. And you know, we chatted just offline quickly. You've got a very interesting background. You really do. So we've introduced you formally, but let's give it some more color. Give me, a few minutes, high level overview of your journey to get to where you are. I think the listeners will find that quite interesting.
Sure. So I'm an HR sort of 20-year veteran. I don't like saying that because it makes me feel old, but I have been in the profession for quite some time. And I started way back when as a university student, not really knowing what it is I wanted to do with my life. And it was a job posting for Sony Music, actually, looking for an HR director that kind of piqued my interest. And those were the days where we would see job postings in newspapers. And I saw this and I remember clipping it and thinking, what they're looking for is exactly who I think I am. And, I think I want to move into the profession of HR. So I kind of pivoted. I was doing my Bachelor of Arts and I decided to do a specialization in human resources. I landed my first job, HR job at Bell Canada, actually telecommunications. And it was in the payroll department and sort of worked my way up from there. I've had many, short stints in HR. I've worked in, telecommunications. I've worked in not-for-profit for the Children's Aid Society, which I was not well suited for. It was a very emotional experience for me. I loved it. It was rewarding, but very, very difficult for me emotionally. I moved on from that into an engineering consulting firm working at a company called Stantec Consulting. Very interesting to work with engineers. I helped build that practice. And then I ended up transitioning to where I probably spent the bulk of my career, which was the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So I ended up spending about 11 and a half years there. And I grew professionally over those 12 years. I started as an HR business partner. I grew to management, then senior management, and I ended my career at the CBC as the head of people for CBC on the English services side. That was a 95% unionized environment, very complicated matrixed organization. We went through quite a bit of change. We were obviously federally funded, so downsizing, cuts, having to reorganize was a big part of my remit. A very large team under me. And, we ended up with a big scandal at the CBC that many Canadians would know about, related to Jian Ghomeshi.
Yes.
I want to qualify that I was not involved in that investigation at all. But my boss at the time I was the senior director of people on the English services side. My boss, who was sort of leading that investigation, ended up being exited following that scandal. And there's, lots of perspectives related to that. But once he left, I was promoted into the role behind him.
Interesting.
And very shortly after that, a new sort of leadership regime out of Quebec came in, and the vice president ended up wanting to make some substantial changes. And within a year of her arrival, I was let go. So I'd have to say that was probably the biggest turning point in my career. Very difficult. I was on such a trajectory, considered a very high potential employee, and I kind of felt like the rug had been ripped out from under me, not at all expected. And I think I took some time after that to pause, to reflect. I had 5-year-old identical twin girls at the time. I think I had sworn to myself I was never going to go back to corporate. My values are really important to me, and I felt like, the politics within a corporate environment didn't necessarily, work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up going into business for myself at that time. And ironically, all of my clients were ex-CBC executives who had gone on to do different things, which was great. It meant that I was very busy, very fast. And, being in business for yourself can be quite lucrative. I had the flexibility to kind of manage my own time and schedule and still be a mom, which is my number one priority. And then I had some people reach out about opportunities again, and I decided to entertain a couple. Took a very short stint at a tech company that lasted about 3 months. Again, I walked into something where I thought I would have a seat at the table. It didn't quite feel right. I knew I had made the wrong decision, and the universe, the stars aligned, and I was approached about this job at GroupM, which is where I am today. I'm very happy. I have found a home where my values are completely aligned. I ran the GroupM Canada people function. I sort of made quite a bit of change when I got there. And then I was approached by our global head, who, I had a really great relationship with about, taking on the North American function. And so I went from leading a function of about 1,000 to 1,200 employees in Canada to now overseeing North America, and we're about 7,500 strong. So it's been a ride.
You have had a ride.
It's been a ride, but I'm feeling good about where I am right now. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm having a really good time.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there, and I made some notes while you were going through. So, at one point, you said, "That's who I thought I was," way back early, right? You said,
Mm-hmm.
that I feel that spoke. That's who I believed I was. What? Tell me more about that. Who did you believe you were, and why was that connected to HR?
Sure. So I've always been a big extrovert. I get my energy from other people. So people would have described me as a people person. Traditional HR is where I started, and we know that the function has evolved quite a bit since then. And it was we're looking for an empathetic leader who can rally the team, help build a structure that allows the business to have a place to go to deal with their employee relations issues. And it was that was the descriptor at the time, and I just thought, that sounds like me. I was very young, very naive.
Like, I could be a therapist.
Right. And that's who I thought I was. This is perfect for me. It was a very short-sighted, very naive sort of, and because I was young and kind of clueless, I didn't I didn't know where I wanted to go. I had no clue of what I wanted to do. I was doing a general arts degree, which I think is amazing for everyone in a general arts program, but I didn't have a specialty. And I didn't, and so it was a posting. It was literally that said, okay, let me just try this thing. And 20 to 25 years later, I'm still here.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to CBC for a sec. There's a few things that I'd like to discuss, and maybe you mentioned Jian Ghomeshi. You weren't directly involved, but what did you learn? What was the learning from you to say, oh man, scandal? Obviously you had a direct front row seat to this thing. What did you learn? What was the learning that you took forward? And because scandals can happen, what did you learn from that?
Oh, I learned so much. I think the biggest learning for me was, we had a leader at that time who I still have a relationship with today, who had been put into the head of people function from a news role. So his entire career was in the capacity of a journalist, and then a journalist who moved into management to lead other journalists, and he grew in his career in such big ways, and eventually was leading all of our news operation. And I can speak about this because it was very public at the time. So he was leading CBC News for quite a few years, and because of his personality. So it's interesting because it kind of goes back to why I wanted to get into HR in the beginning. He was this known empathetic leader, very, very caring, but he did have a news background. He did not have any formal HR training.
Okay.
And 5 minutes into sort of taking on this very big job for an organization of almost 10,000 people, he was handed on a silver platter what today people would describe as the most complicated HR file. I think there's coursework in universities tied to the Ghomeshi scandal, and had to lead the investigation. And unfortunately, I would say he led it through the lens of his previous life, which is all he knew. And that was as a news sort of through the lens of a news executive. And what I learned in that scenario is, if you don't leverage the expertise of the people around you, because I don't think you have to be a trained subject matter expert practitioner to lead an operation or a function. I actually don't believe that. I think you can lead it, but you will only be successful if you're leveraging the expertise of the people around you. And I think that's where he fell short. He didn't do that. He ran with
trying to figure it out himself.
Yeah, the story. And unfortunately, it ended very badly for him. And the CBC had to part ways because of the mishandling of the investigation. Great guy, very good human. We were all sort of taken aback by his departure, but we did not follow a process that allowed for a fair and equitable investigation. And I think my takeaway is you've got to leverage the expertise of the people around you. You have to really unpack what you're dealing with. And in cases like that, just from an equity perspective, formal training is necessary for sure.
But training on when you say training, you mean just training on how to do that, how to leverage and listen to those around you and collaborate around things, correct?
That's correct. I'm not a huge, people wouldn't describe me as a very traditional human resources professional. I'm pretty unorthodox. I have a very different approach. I don't describe myself as process oriented, but there are moments, and that was definitely one of them, where process was going to be your best friend. You needed to follow a methodical sort of way of investigating everything that needed to be looked into in order to get to the right outcome. And I think a lot of steps were missed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And that's, those are such tough situations. And I agree, when you have something like that pop up, nobody has the expertise. No one's been through it before. So there's, you really have to lean on internal and external resources to get through something like that. I
Sure.
agree more. Let's go to heavy unionized. It's not something we discussed too much. When I had my security company, I had a great run-ins with the laborers union and the steel workers, which was a ball. And if there's any steel
I'm
workers
sure you
out
had.
there, right? Well, I miss all the steel workers people, and huge shout out to you. But the unions, from my perspective, I try to negotiate in such an unorthodox way, and I was making big bets that I just freaked them out. Actually, the laborers union just said, forget it. This is no fun for us. We're just going to, I think they literally just didn't, they started to unionize a few of our security sites in Toronto and just said, we're out of here. Forget this kid's too crazy. Because with my union negotiations, I mean, one of the things that I started to negotiate, which the union hated, was I said, okay, well, if employees are paying you fees, for your representation, and you're making money off this, and we're going to negotiate a contract, then I need two things in here. I need you to ensure that I have labor because you're supplying the labor, and I need to ensure that I have qualified labor, or you're going to pay a financial penalty. And they were like, what the, who the? They just did not like that.
Right.
Right.
I love
and
it.
so, yeah, it worked great. And I was super unorthodox with my negotiation. I was at the table the whole time. And even when they were doing the ballots, I mean, it was neck and neck. They couldn't believe that I had turned union members that were like 7 and 10 year unionized veterans, I'll call it, to vote against them. And so they actually called the vote. We were tied 6-6, and they wanted to make a deal right away. And so they said, okay, look, let's just do it down to these locations. Let's not blanket Ontario. They knew they were going to lose, or potentially they could have lost. So it was a lot it was stressful. It was unknown, but it was fun. What was your experience with unions, and what are the HR practices that you took forward from being involved in that environment?
For me, it was humanity. I took a very human approach. I appealed to rational ways of looking at people and things. It was interesting. It was tumultuous at the beginning, and I was just like, who do these guys think they are? And, I remember an example where we had an employee that we were performance managing, and we had on a formal sort of PIP, a formal performance improvement plan. And, we were sort of at the end of the rope. We had collaborated with the union, which is what the collective agreement said we had to do every step of the way. Performance wasn't improving, a tenured employee, and we got to the very end of it. And it was time to pull the plug. And we had dotted all of our I's and crossed our T's. I was fairly junior at that time. And I was like, okay, well, now I have to, consult with the union rep on this case, just to say we're here, we're at the end of the rope. And unfortunately, we're going to have to part ways with the employee because the performance just hasn't improved. And I remember what went into getting to that place where, again, we had to follow the law, tooth and nail in order to exit a tenured employee. But when we were there, even after having done it all right, something came out of the woodwork. And I remember a union rep saying to me, I actually think that there's a health issue here. And kind of sprung it on me at the 11th hour. And it had never come up before. And I remember getting into my first sort of heated battle with the union president at the time, because, I'd been very clear if that was the case, it needed to go a different route, and, we would need medical backup, et cetera, et cetera. And then it became something else. Another reason why we couldn't do it, because obviously the employee couldn't substantiate a medical condition, but it got really ugly. And I just remember thinking, this is too hard. Why do we have to go through this? We're trying to run an efficient business here. And why does everything have to be a fight? Fast forward 10 years, I would say I'm in touch with a lot of those union leads and guys that I had to, hash it out with over the years. But my approach was, hey, Glenn, can we sit down and have a conversation about this off the record? I had a lot of off the record conversations, and it was, here's our situation. This is not good for anybody. tell me how we can fix this. How can we get to and make them feel like they were a part of the solution, which they were, without having to follow the letter of the law. And
Right.
and it worked for me. It
Look,
really did. Yeah,
I
it
couldn't
worked.
I couldn't agree more, right? Because
Yeah,
everybody, when they feel union, it goes lawyer to union's lawyer, and there's
yeah,
no relationship building. I think you're so spot on. These
yeah.
one-on-one meetings, it's funny, Serena. I remember way back in the day when I was getting into it too. I remember a funny email I wrote to one of the union guys. Said, "Hey, why don't you come to Halifax? You could stay at my house and we'll have a
Yeah.
kitchen party and have some lobster sandwiches." And they were like, "Okay, I can't deal with this guy." They were like,
You know what? Hilarious, because when they like you, it becomes so hard for them, right?
That's right.
And one of the things I did and changed, and I totally take ownership for this because I think it changed the way we work, is when we'd have these union meetings, it would be management on one side of the room, and there were these long rectangular tables, and then
Right.
the union would sit on the other side of the room. And it was adversarial from the start, just in the way that we were set up, right?
It looked like a Vladimir Putin meeting. Ever see Vladimir Putin when he's on one side? Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was like. And I remember saying, we're not doing this anymore. And just that change, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? And I said, we are going to sit on round tables. Okay. So
Right.
we're going to configure the room differently. We're going to sit around a round table, and we're going to talk and hash things out this way. And it was just even the change in the way we sat that changed the dynamic in the room. And it became more, hey guys, and then anyone want to go out for drinks later? Let's go
I
out for
love that.
drinks later.
I love it.
And I didn't want to necessarily do that after fighting for 4 hours in a boardroom. But that relationship piece was so key. When you can build an actual relationship, know who, somebody's kids are, ask about someone's wife or husband, it definitely sort of brings people's guard down. And as we know, and by the end of it, we were working very, very well together. For sure.
I love that strategy. And I think that human to human, as you mentioned it so eloquently, I think you're totally right. And it's funny when you talk about the boardroom table versus the round table. I agree. And, I'm very particular about the meeting environment, and Maddie she would agree, it's very rare that I meet in a boardroom, very rare, unless it's a very quick transactional meeting with someone I've already met 100 times with. If it's relationship building time, I'm actually in a coach, comfortable chair. I go to a different meeting at our office where there's no table in between. It's a comfortable chair. You're sitting back. You feel more relaxed. You're more comfortable. And I think people don't put enough stock into small little micro items like that, about where you're sitting, how you're sitting. I think people miss that completely, and there's huge value.
I agree. I completely agree. I think space is everything. I mean, that might sort of lead us to, one of the things that I know you want to talk about. We're going through a very interesting, complicated time right now as we start to reintegrate or encourage people back into our office spaces. And we're actually trying not to encourage people back to work, because I don't think they're going back to something that, that they used to live. I think they're coming into work in a very different sort of hybrid environment under different conditions. And so it's a new experience for everyone. But one of the biggest factors right now, one of the biggest things that we're trying to figure out is how to do this in a way that encourages people to want to return to the office. And space is where we're putting a lot of our investment. Big open spaces, boardrooms, on the interior. The exterior is just, big round tables, lots of greenery, close to a ton of sunlight, because that actually fosters collaboration. It fosters, relationship building. It makes people, feel like they can ideate together and create. And we're a creative environment. We, and we want to ensure that we're giving that to our people. But space is everything. I completely agree with you. And in setting your space up in a way that makes people feel encouraged to want to be there, I think is hugely important.
Remember the days when company culture was defined by how many foosball tables and weekly happy hours there were? Today, employees expect more. That's why Empyrean empowers organizations to build a better culture by connecting employees to meaningful, life-enriching benefits. Benefits that allow your employees to be their best selves, both in and outside the workplace. Is your benefits function positively impacting company culture? Take Empyrean's online benefits maturity assessment to see how you measure up and where you can take a more strategic approach. A better workplace culture starts with benefits. So visit GoEmpyrean.com to take the assessment and start building a better culture through benefits that actually matter. Empyrean, where real benefits live.
So and I want to come back. I want to come back to the office. I want to keep going on your on some of your history stuff because I really like these topics. If that's okay.
Of course.
I want to go to look, CBC. One more thing that I want to discuss. Obviously, that environment was up, down, let people go higher, like just all over the map, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what was the learning from that as far as, we're going into that environment again, this company's let go 100,000 and usually it's the tech companies that are going first. What are you seeing? What are companies doing right? What are they doing wrong? What did you learn from the mass, cleaning up of the org chart and layoffs? What did you learn from that? And what's going right? What's going wrong in the world today, as far as leaders and whether it's messaging, how they're executing on it? What are you seeing? What are you feeling?
I feel like these are right now, I feel like these are unprecedented times. I can speak about my CBC experience. They were, because we were federally funded, we would get, hit with, you need to find, this much money in savings because we're cutting your budgets by this much. And so I was very, very familiar with mass layoffs, sadly, and unfortunately, and it was the worst part of my job, of course. But because we were unionized, going about how we would lay off was pretty prescribed, and we had to we had to follow again and so we had to get really creative, and so even in an environment where it was pretty prescriptive how we would lay off, and again it would be the most junior people out first, and in many cases as we were trying to evolve as an organization and operate a little bit more like a profitable business in our programming and really tried to make money, it was very difficult when cuts happened to have to lay off, our most junior people or the people who had entered the organization, last, because
some of those could be your brightest. It's
my God,
they could be your A players.
Were. Of course they were. They were, they had subject matter expertise, and we were evolving to become a lot more digital. They had the formal digital training. And we would have to keep, very tenured employees who were wonderful and who would teach our younger people, our newer people, all of the things they needed to know about broadcast media. But in some cases, that wasn't the case. We had people that were kind of coasting, that were sitting in jobs for a really long time that had no intention of going anywhere. So we had to look at things like, how can we work with that group of people who have kind of been with the organization for a really long time, who are incredibly valued, but say, hey, let's make some space for some of these people that are coming in who are going to help drive our organization forward. Let's appeal to your passion for the organization you work. Because what I'll tell you is, when I talk about CBC, I still say we, because when you work for that organization, you believe in it. That's the station that my parents came and were watching with 3 channels as immigrants to the country. And I was very proud to work for the Canadian Broadcasting Organization. So it gets in your veins, right? And so if you appeal to people's passion and let's make this company amazing, depending on who's in power, there are parties that want to abolish the CBC entirely. And if we want to make it great and continue to have it grow, let's figure out how we do that together. And so we would incentivize. We looked at, hey, we how about we incentivize you with this, so that we can make room to keep and those were some serious negotiations. But it worked. People, their pride in the brand and wanting to see the CBC do well allowed a lot of people to put their hands up and go, no, don't let go of that individual. I'm putting my hand up. Thank you for this, incentive. I'm going to take it. And we ran programs like that every time we had to do mass layoffs. It was good.
Yeah.
It was great. Today, I think the planet is going through, I think it's, if anybody has all the answers, I'd love to speak to them because it's complicated. The pandemic changed the way we work, and I don't know that we're listening enough to our people. Everybody's scrambling right now. You're seeing cuts are happening all around. We're also in a position right now where we have to find efficiencies. And last year it was the Great Resignation, and people were dropping like flies and taking different jobs and just exiting in the masses.
Right.
And we couldn't hire fast enough. We couldn't find the talent. And then you find the talent, you hire, retention rates start to stabilize, and all of a sudden it's we overhired, and now we're not meeting our financials, and we have to make some really tough decisions and find efficiencies. And then it's straight to the tendency as C-suite is to go right to the bottom line, where I think what we need to do is figure out, try and understand what our people need, what they're feeling. And I'm not a big believer in overcompensation, but I do think that we need to co-create. I think we need to figure this out together. And so a lot of listening sessions, a lot of, we might be over surveying, and I don't know that that's always a good thing, but just really trying to understand how people are feeling right now so we can build plans around what we want to see in the end.
Well, it's funny, as you're talking, the pendulum swung, right? Because in the last 12 months, it was Great Resignation, which to me was just a labeling. I just have a labeling of people that want to try something new.
Exactly.
I think it fast tracked that process of people looking in the mirror saying, I'm not happy here. It is time to make a change. Combined with people retiring because they just had enough. It was combined with people, tech companies and different companies being able to pay more. And so people exiting based on pay. I heard a lot of those people have gone back, but the pendulum has swung to, I'm happy that I'm just working. After I read the headlines and all these layoffs, geez, how's my own company doing? Maybe I have an eye in the finances, maybe I don't. But I think that now people are a little like, I'm just kind of happy I'm in a job right now. That feeling is starting to come back, which is I think it should be balanced. It shouldn't be on one side or the other. Would you agree?
I totally agree. And I think what's happening is you're absolutely right. People are saying, no, I'm happy to have a job. I'm grateful, but putting some boundaries around, how they show up. Right. And that has been labeled too. It's been labeled quiet quitting. So I'm in LA because I was doing a panel at an ad color. It's an advertising organization event, and it was a 3-day conference. And I was on a panel related to quiet quitting, and my view on that is, it has a very negative connotation to it just by the words quiet quitting, but it's an engagement thing. It's always existed.
100%.
And so you're right about the labels. I think we're just trying to call things, and really we've got, how do we engage? The world has changed. We've had to pivot. I think we're all struggling with a little bit of PTSD following 3 years of, chaos.
Absolutely.
Around, so how do we take a different approach with our people, knowing that everyone's kind of going through that? And so it's not quiet quitting. I think people are, putting some boundaries. I don't necessarily want to work a 15-hour day. I've got 2 children at home. If the pandemic did anything, it made me realize the importance of my family and really being present for my kids. And so even I've had to put some boundaries around that. You know what? I'm going to check out at 6. I'm going to give my kids 2 hours, and then I'm going to go back online, at 8. And that way I've given them some undivided attention. Now, if I'm needed in those 2 hours, sure, I work in the C-suite. I know what my obligations are. But there are many people who are saying, I'm not getting paid enough to be burning myself out. My mental health is more important to me than everything I was giving. And I gave 150%. And I never got that. I didn't get that promotion. And I'm not getting that salary increase that I needed. And so people are saying, I'm going to come in, I'm going to work my hours. I'm going to fulfill my job description, but I'm going to have some parameters and some boundaries around that. And so it's a very debatable topic. But yeah, I think people are struggling with engagement right now. So organizations need to focus on how to re-engage their people.
Yeah, I agree. I always say that there's this triangle, right? Like I'll call this the golden triangle of happiness at work. And I think that there's three aspects, and I think I'm ready to add a fourth, and maybe it tucks into one of these three. We can talk about this. So one of the three that's critical is you need to really enjoy or love your leadership team, the people you follow. That's critically important. Okay, that's one. Two is you have to like the job that you do for the most part. Doesn't mean you don't have an aspect that you don't like, but for the most part, you like the day-to-day. You're excited to go to work, okay? And then three is the team and company culture. That is very important. If you don't have those three, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And that can move faster. If you don't have any of the three, you're out of there fast. Two of the three, if you're missing two of the three, you're still up pretty fast. One of the three, it takes a little longer. The fourth that I would either add or tuck into company culture is people's well-being, their mental health, their boundaries, their family life and personal life, and that balance. And I think that it's also a component that now people need to think about. That's the part that we're trying to figure out, that right. And so let me go to you for a second on that, because I'm interested in how you've been incredibly successful in your career and involved in the C-suite, but you left and went out on your own for a little bit, for 2 years, I believe, right?
I did, yeah, for just over 2 years.
So I want to talk about two things. One, tell me about how the intersection of you have two twin daughters, and so your daughters would have been maybe just 5 or 6 at the time?
5, yeah. They were 5 when I parted ways with the CBC.
Tough age. Was it easier with the family when you were home as an entrepreneur or not? Were you working more? I'm just curious on what the impacts of corporate versus entrepreneurship. And I know you were more of a consultant, I think, or I'm not sure.
Yes, I was. Yeah. So corporate, you're on, you report to leadership. So the expectations of your leader are what you're trying to fulfill. Right. And I agree with your triangle, and even the fourth component. I think your leadership is everything. I think at the CBC, we had very traditional ways of working. And so, but we were a news operation, a 24-hour news environment, and news breaks at any given time. Right. So if we have a crisis in Afghanistan where one of our reporters has just been kidnapped, it's all hands on deck, which actually happened, by the way. We had a reporter be kidnapped by the Taliban, and we had to, get into we called it a war room, and it was negotiations with, Al-Qaeda. Like it was very serious stuff. And as a very senior leader within the organization, I had to be at that table as we strategized about how we were going to keep our journalists safe and how we were going to get our employee back. And it was insane. And those were 15, I kid you not, 20-hour days. Now, a crisis like that doesn't happen all the time, but you're getting paid to be on. And for me, the first 5 years of my children's life after maternity leave, because I did take my full maternity, the first 4 years, my career's always been very important to me, but it dominated a lot of my time. And, it was a stressful environment. And so I would say my mental health was 100% impacted. But then when you add on mother's guilt, that feeling of, I've got these 2 little girls at home that I'm not focused on. I can't, because I have so much on my brain right now. That also takes a toll. And so I was living with, oh my God, the burden of the pressures of work. And because work was so important to me and I wanted to, grow and achieve, and I've always been that type of human, I was focused on it. And I tried to be the very best mother I could. But I think what I was doing was in my downtime. my off time. And so when, I lost my job, and in the worst way, it was a very, there was a bit of an uproar because I was a very well-known, the union came to my defense, ironically. And,
Wow.
it was crazy. And because of how it happened, and the decision was made by somebody who didn't know me and quite frankly, didn't care. It ended up being, very traumatizing. And what it forced me to do was stop, pause, think about what was really important. And to me, it was those two little girls, and figure out what the next chapter was going to look like. And so I was going through emotions. I was like, I'm never going back to corporate. But the consulting thing initially was, that's going to give me some time to do a little project over here and a little project over here. And then I can, really dedicate my time to my children. And that's how it
came with
started.
uncertainty, right? Can I pay the bills because I might not have a customer tomorrow? So a balance of flexibility, but uncertainty.
100%. That was, I would say that that was the hardest part for me. It was that feeling of failure. And it was that feeling of, this is a pretty public thing. And am I going to get another job again? It was like, I went through so much in that time. And then,
Serena,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. What was the, obviously, emotional roller coaster, probably a punch in the gut confidence stealer. Okay. You had to be at a low place from a confidence perspective. What are some of the things that if you take yourself back there, what were some of the key things to help you rebuild your confidence? Because that's happened to a lot of people. I know lots that have had that rug pulled from under them. It's the worst. I've seen it. And it's, even 5 years after that, you go back to the conversation when someone's in a job they love and they could tear up, it's still.
I will cry. Yeah, no, I actually, when I think about that time, I realized that, you talked about one of the 3 points in your triangle was you have to love what you do, right? And because I'm a very feeling, sort of passionate person, I loved what I was doing. I thrived in the chaos. I liked fixing problems and problem solving. And, I talk about being in a war room and having something like a crisis around me. And my energy, my adrenaline was everything. So I had my entire identity, this is what I learned, was tied to the organization, to my job. And that's where I went wrong. When I look back at, why it hit me so hard to lose the job, was because I was so invested. And I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't be so invested in their careers. I think you should be, and you should, but I think it's important to have objectivity and balance and work actively to ensure that you have that. Because I didn't. I put everything in, all my eggs in one place, and so when the rug was pulled out, I was in shock. I went through the whole wheel of emotions. I went through. I would argue I was depressed. That confidence piece. I'm a confident woman. And I had to rebuild it because it went away. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. My husband at the time was and is a very successful businessman. So it wasn't, how am I going to pay the bills? That actually wasn't my thing. Because thankfully I was in a position where we were okay. The business was doing really well, and that was fine. But it was, who am I? I don't even know who I am anymore. And I felt like that was stripped of me.
Well, I was just going to say, and look, yeah. I understand, and I appreciate you saying that. Look, it wasn't about putting bread on the table, but there has to be this, okay, fine. The mortgage is paid. That's great. Check that box. But internally, as you went on your own, there has to be this, self-worth, imposter syndrome if the next client doesn't come, because then it's like, well, I just do this, but I'm not, I'm judging myself whether I'm successful, whether I have to put bread on the table or not. There's a lot of pressure, I assume, you put on yourself to say, does that make sense?
It 100% does. When I was getting gigs, little, projects, some of the work that I was being offered was stuff I had done a decade ago in a very junior capacity. And so someone was paying me an hourly rate to do work, not that
Some
I
humble
felt
pie for you.
yes. And that was very eye-opening. It also really impacted my self-esteem. It did. Like, oh my God. And then I was like, and so what everything you said is bang on. I felt all of those things. I was very uncertain about sort of where I was going to go from there, who would hire me, what type of work I would get. And I remember I ended up getting a gig with a private equity company, and it was, they were paying me a large amount of money hourly, and it was good. It was great. But the work they had me doing was, very administrative in nature. And if you know Serena, I am not in it. My attention to detail, admin, like that's not my strength. And so I was doing these things and working in Excel and, spreadsheets. And I was like, I don't actually know how to do this.
I'm sweating. By the way, I'm sweating because I hate Excel. I'm sweating right now. Thank you.
I'm sweating. I used to sweat every day because I was like, how do I fake this? It was imposter syndrome to the max. I was like, I'm getting paid a lot of money to perform a role, but this is out of my scope. I don't know how. But it also made me feel like, oh God, what's happened here? Like, this is not, and that's when I started to get the itch to go back to real work. But I had to question whether or not I was even capable at that time.
That was my next question. Why then to leave that? So it sounds like it was more, I just don't love this work. I can't be as choosy. I'm not in my zone of genius. Let's call it my strike zone. I'm kind of forced to do these other things. I need to go get back to that. And that's
exactly what happened. And I was like, but who's going to hire me? I was fired from the CBC after a 12-year career where I was on this trajectory. And
you only had union friends at this point.
Only union friends who I still am in touch with on the only
Hello,
reason
union.
I ever
Hello,
look
we
at
love
Facebook.
you, union. We love you.
Exactly. It was rough. But then I think it was my, I was a friend of mine, a very, very close friend of mine worked for this organization, this tech company, and he had reached out saying, hey, we're looking for a vice president of people and culture. It's a global role, Serena, and I think you should meet the CEO. And I said, okay, and he's like, you never know, one thing could lead to the other. And I ended up doing that. I think I met with the COO first and then the CEO and had a series of interviews, and, I was trying to rebuild my confidence, trying to remember what I was good at and sell it to them. And I thought, my very close friend works here. He's been here for a long time. He loves it. And so let me see. And one thing led to another, and they gave me the job. They handed me the offer, and I was very, very excited about it. And from on my resume, vice president, global role, it was a good job. And then, I remember being in a boardroom, and I was speaking, and I was saying something about culture and engagement. These guys had Glassdoor reviews that were horrid. So that actually intrigued me, because I thought, okay, here's a problem for me to fix. Let me go into this organization to help build culture. I think they had like a 2-star rating on Glassdoor. And when you read them, it's just nightmare. And then I was sitting at the table, and I leaned in, and it was all men. So the entire executive team were men. And I was the only woman in the room. And I remember, starting to speak, and the CEO kind of shooed me with his hand.
Ooh, a little hushing of the hand.
Like a hush, like he didn't want me to talk. Like, yeah. Okay, kind of thing. And I remember going, what just happened? What just happened? And I remember at the time I was actually on a holiday. So I had a pre-booked a holiday, and I left, and I was in LA, my favorite place, clearly. And I remember looking at my husband saying, I think I made the wrong call. It took me 2.5 years to land a job. On paper, it looks like, everything. It's exactly what I need. It'll help me get to my next thing, but I need to give it a year. Like, I have to be here for a year in order for it to be substantive and for me to land somewhere else. And he just looked at me, and he's like, what's wrong with you? He's like, after everything you went through at the CBC, if you hate this, leave. right? If you hate this, leave. And I just remember having like a moment of panic going, what did I do? And I had many of those shooing examples, and, it was just clearly not the place for me.
Note to
And
self, don't
note,
shoe Serena.
don't shoe me. Okay. but what, and it was, I know I didn't have a voice. And so what
Right,
impact was I going to have organization? And I was very unhappy very fast. And that was not a good sign. And when he looked at me, it calmed me down. I was like, you're absolutely right. And so I crazily, and I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. And when you need something, it comes to you when you need it. I kid you not. I received an email from a former colleague, very, very a senior executive who's now at Rogers and runs sales at Rogers Media. And he called me and said, hey, Serena, I want to introduce you to my buddy. He's looking for a head of HR. I saw on your LinkedIn that you've just taken. I was like, no, don't finish your sentence. Introduce us. And he did. And again, one thing, like literally, I went in for an interview at 8 a.m. By 11, I had the offer in my inbox. So it was great.
Wow.
It was great. Yeah, it was great.
The world comes to us when you're a good person,
yes,
and you're doing good things. The world will reach out and help you, give you a helping hand. I love that story. And I kudos, to your partner who objectively saw things clearly during a moment of chaos. And the other lesson is passive aggressiveness isn't just in text and voice, it's in body language. And I think that's important for leaders to understand. It's not just in your tone or the words that you say. Passive aggressive and bullshit behavior that comes in all different forms. And
it really does. It really does. And when I talk to people now, when I do panels or when I have conversations, even, we've launched a program called Launchpad, where we're bringing in non-traditional media talent into the media industry. And there are people from, all kinds of places who wouldn't typically have access to media advertising. I do a session with them when they start in their training. And that's what I say. I mean, companies are choosing you, but you're choosing the company as well. It's a two-way street. And we have to make sure that, as you're assessing, make sure that there's a connection there. Make sure that the leadership is representative of what you're looking for. That was my biggest takeaway.
Serena, was my kind of final place I was going is just for those, and I understand what you're saying, but bring us through. Go back in time. What are the actions you take to uncover that, to ensure that there's alignment, right? Because I agree, make sure there's alignment. But talk to knowing what you know today, what are the actions you would have taken to get to a place where you wouldn't have taken that job? What are those things that you would do?
So ask really tough questions. I think when you're on the other side of the table and you're being interviewed, we think we're here to sell ourselves. And we are, of course. Here's what I bring to the table. Here's why you should hire me. But I think that period of time when you're going through that interview process, and now it's not just one interview and you get a job. I think through the Great Resignation, it might have been, or when people were turning over very quickly. But I think it's talk to me about your DE&I strategy. What is the company's mission? What are you looking to achieve in the course, in the short term and in the longer term? I think you have to go equipped with what's important to you and ask questions, a lot of them. And I think, in that interview process, you will get, when it's a two-way dialogue, you'll start to be able to see, is this a leader I can work for? What does my leader stand for? Because I think first and foremost, we know people don't leave organizations. They leave their managers, right? Their leaders. Yeah. So get to understand who you're working for. That's critically important. And then have it evolve to talk to me about the organization, the values of this organization, the importance of do you have ERGs? What place do they have within the organization? What does engagement look like? And put the leaders on the spot to answer. I love when people ask me those questions, because they get to see who I am. And there are people who might feel like, I don't know if that works for me, or, I think it's a two-way, and I think you have to go prepared. I think you do your research. I think you look at things out there. I'm not a big Glassdoor person. When I was researching for that company at the time, I did look at that, but actually it was the reason I wanted that job, because I thought I could help fix it and leave it in solve the problem. But it's just research and communication and chemistry, and make sure, the things that you care the most about. In my organization, the average age is 25 to, I think, 35. And so, a lot of our population in that demographic are, activists. They care about, they want to work, perform their jobs, but they also want to be connected to a cause. And so one of the things that we're really paying a lot of attention to is that need, that desire to give back. When George Floyd was killed, and this was very shortly after it happened, and I was appointed to the role, this US-based role, during a racial uprising, not just within the US, but across the world. And I remember asking, my global lead at the time, like, what are we doing? What programs do we have in place? What education is there? How are we removing bias in the workplace? What's our commitment? Do we have metrics attached to accountability, making sure that we are doing everything possible to diversify the workforce? And, I asked a lot of questions.
Great questions.
And I think that's what we need to do more of, so that you can see whether there is an alignment.
And let me bring so another point that I think is helpful in this, because I had an interview yesterday with a very bright individual named Maggie, and I was saying, look, we're talking about the culture. We've had a few meetings now, but it's now your turn to go talk to individuals at the company and make sure that I'm not BSing you. You better go look under the hood. That's your job, And in our, what we started to do in our job advertisements is we give current employee references. And then I actually added a link. I had Andrew Dart, who's I had lunch with yesterday, great leader in our business. And I interviewed him and had a podcast that, because I talk a lot about our company culture. And I thought, not just for the guests, but this is a tool to be able to use for the future. And we post this on our ads to say, and look, you don't believe us, here's an interview with one of our staff members,
I love that. I love that you do that. Yeah, I love it. I love that.
And so I feel like that's also, because you have access to information. Yes, you can check Glassdoor, but I think it would have also been helpful if you said, here, give me 3 employees. I want to talk to them. I want to have copies with them. And you ask very tough questions. And that would have been the format where I think you could have done that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And when you think about Glassdoor, most people who go to Glassdoor are unhappy about something.
Right,
so they're going to write about it. Right.
That's right.
And that's why, when people are leaving the organization, we put a lot of emphasis, or the teams did, on exit interviews. And yes, they're helpful for sure. We can build strategies to sort of address the themes that come out of exit interviews. But what about stay interviews? Let's talk to people about why they're here, why they're with us, what keeps them here. And so we do stay interviews as well. And so I love that you have links to actual testimonials from existing employees who are just happy to be there and can back up all of the things that you've said about the culture. So I think that's great. Amazing.
Well, Serena, look, I've loved this conversation. I really enjoyed this. I know we went in a few different directions, really unpacked your story, which I thought was fascinating. And we covered all kinds of topics. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And yeah, thanks. You keep doing what you're doing. And thanks for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate I appreciated being here. Loved the conversation. You need to keep doing what you're doing. I might want to pick your brain a bit as we start to evolve, because clearly you have some of the answers, and congratulations on your huge successes. I think that's awesome. And it was really nice to meet. Really nice to meet you.
Thank you, Serena.
For more information about Serena, please follow her on LinkedIn. To learn more about our books or our Scaling Culture Masterclass about how to build and sustain a resilient, high-performing team, please go to scalingculture.org. And to learn more about our sponsor of this episode, Empyrean, please go to goempyrean.com. GoempyRean.com. And lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment and share the podcast with one of your friends or colleagues. We'll be back soon with another incredible guest.